Welcome back to the Wednesday edition of the Filling Station, broadcasting on Facebook on I Know I'm Loyalty and also on Romans 8:28 Publishing. I am excited about today. Why am I excited about today? Because God woke me up today. And I know if God woke me up today, He has a purpose for waking me up. That He's got some things for me to do, and that always excites me. And here's the thing, He woke you up too. So that means, He's got some plans for you today as well. And that's what we're going to kind of be looking at today, as we've been looking at a little series here, how to really make sure that we're walking in those things that God has called us to do, that those things that God has called us to do, that we're building and we're going the way that He would want us to go, that we're doing things scripturally sound, amen, that we're going through things in the pattern and the way that God would want us to. So we just want to know that God has started off our day, that He started off with a purpose, with a plan, and we are going to walk right into it. So we're finishing up here just a little series. The series we started actually last Wednesday here on Facebook, and the title of that first episode there was Build It Anyway. Build It Anyway. That's right. Last Wednesday we were looking in the book of Nehemiah. That man Nehemiah, for those of you who didn't see that one, that broadcast, we were talking about Nehemiah, who, as the Israelites were in exile in Babylon, and he had a nice cushy job. He had a comfortable job. He was the cupbearer for the king. He wasn't lacking. He wasn't wanting. He wasn't have to break rocks, and he wasn't have to do a lot of manual hard labor. He wasn't have to be out in the heat. He had a nice, comfy, cozy job there, and yet God touched his heart and said, He said, Nehemiah, I want you to go back and rebuild the wall around Jerusalem. As Nehemiah was talking to some people who had been to Israel, not too long before, they were telling them the disrepair that the wall was in, the condition that the city of Jerusalem was in, and it touched Nehemiah's heart to go back and rebuild the wall. And we looked at on that Wednesday. The reason we called it Build It Anyway, the reason we called it Build It Anyway, there were many reasons why Nehemiah could have said, no, I'm not going back to rebuild the wall, even though his heart was touched to do it by God. He could have said, you know what, there's only like 40,000 people left in all of Israel. There used to be 1.5 million. There's hardly anybody there. Who's it really going to help if I go back and build the wall again? He could have used that excuse. He could have used that out. We learned as we read through the scriptures on that Wednesday, we learned that the people that were there, the few that were there, weren't treating each other right. That the people who had the power, the people who had the authority and the money, they were lending to the poor. They were lending to those who only had a little bit. And in exchange for lending it to them, they were taking away all their property. They were taking their children into slavery. So now Nehemiah could easily say, look, there's hardly anybody back there. And look, these people are doing the same thing that led them to be sent into exile. They haven't even learned the lesson. God, are you sure you want me to go back and rebuild this wall? But that wasn't it. Those weren't the only excuses why he could have said, no, I'm not going to build. Also, it turns out it was a very difficult task, as we learned as we read the scriptures, that the wall was knocked down. There were gaping holes in the walls. There were stones off of stones, and stones were broken. And not only were things broken down, but they were burned. So the doors, the gates, they were nothing but ash. How do you rebuild ash? You got to have some resources. And there weren't a whole lot of resources in the land. So here you've got a small population of people who aren't acting right, and you've got this monstrous task. My goodness, I could easily see Nehemiah saying, you know what, that's too much for any man. But then on top of all that, on top of those things, we see as we read through the scriptures, that not only that, but there were people who wanted to kill Nehemiah, who wanted to kill the people who ended up rebuilding the wall. And that life danger to life, that danger to body, that possibility of harm. Boy, that's another reason why he easily could have said, no, I'm not going to go. But yet Nehemiah said, I'm going to go build it anyway. And we don't know why. When we don't know why it was so important to God, really, until after the wall is rebuilt. And then we see the Israelites that were gathered back there. Here we have 70 years after they've gone into exile. These children, these people who weren't even born when they went into exile, now being gathered back together. And as they're being gathered back together, they're reading God's law, and they're reading the books of Moses, and they're actually making a commitment to God. They're verbally saying, these are the things that we're going to do, God. And then they're rejoicing, and they're shouting out, and they can be heard for miles around as they rejoice. And now we see, okay, that's why it was so important to God. And it's one thing to know what's important, and rebuilding the wall was important. It's another thing to know why it's important, and so that all the children could be gathered back together again. That's why it was important. That'll take you so far. But then on Saturday we said that's not enough. We've got to look at how do we do it. So now Nehemiah has agreed to undertake this task. But how do you go about doing it so that you don't have, so that the periods of struggle and the periods of strife are short and the periods of prosperity are long? How do we go about doing it so that we don't get halfway through it and can't finish and now end up being an embarrassment to God? Here we're out there saying we're doing it in God's power, but we're not doing it God's way. And then when it leads to failure, those people we said we're doing it for God, they don't know that we weren't being obedient. And so what happens to them? God has let us down. So we've got to understand how we do it in God's power. And on Saturday, as we were talking about how to do it in God's power, we looked at the first two key ingredients on how to do it in God's power. And we looked at on Saturday, we looked at number one was prayer. The first thing that we looked at, we were saying, how do you go about doing it? And the first thing we said was prayer. Not only because prayer was the first thing that Nehemiah did, because when Nehemiah got it in his heart to do it, the first thing he did was pray. But the reason we listed prayer as number one, not only because it was the first thing he did, but as we see each step, each ingredient that we look at as we're going through this process of building that thing that God gave us, each step, prayer has got to be a part of every ingredient, a part of every step. Prayer is the key really to getting to where you want to be and doing it God's way. Then the second ingredient we looked at was taking our vision to the right people. The second thing, once we've prayed and we're sure that God has sent us to go, see, here's what Nehemiah did. Nehemiah, he took to the king. He went to the king before he went to anybody else because the king had the authority to send him on his way. Because the king had the power to write letters to get him the things he would need when he get there. As opposed to what we do sometimes, let me not even say you, as opposed to what I do sometimes, where sometimes I know, I'll go and I'll tell my cousin about it, I'll tell my friend about it, I'll go tell the barber about it while I'm getting my hair cut. I know sometimes the lady might talk to the girls in the shop about it. We may talk to that person on the street, that person that you just kind of gossip with on the street to find out what's going on in the neighborhood. And we go talk to all these people about it. When these people have no authority, no power to help fulfill the vision, yet they're the first people we take it to. And very often, we take it to girlfriends and all kinds of other things. And very often, not only do they not have the power to push us there, but sometimes we're even sharing our vision with people who want to hold us back from it, from people that don't want to see us accomplish the vision. And then what happens? Now, you started off this grand plan, this big task. It was already daunting before your eyes. And now because you shared it with the wrong people, now you started off in negativity. Now you've got people telling you why it can't happen, why it won't work, why you can't do it, as opposed to taking it to those people that have the ability and the desire to push you toward what God has called you to do. And then there's one other thing. This wasn't one of the official ingredients, one of the official steps, but one of the things that we saw early on as Nehemiah was planning this, as we were talking on Saturday about this very topic, as we started talking about how to build the way God would want us to, we looked at the fact that as success begins to unfold before Nehemiah, as he receives favor from the king to go on his journey, he gives the glory, he gives the honor, he gives all the praise to God for doing it. He doesn't go out and tell his friends, oh, look at what I did. I convinced the king to do this. I convinced the king to do that. But he says it was God's gracious hand that allowed him to get the approval of the king to do it. So that's where we've gone up to our little 3-part series that we're doing here. Those were parts 1 and 2. If you want to watch the full videos on those, I will have a link to those at the end of this video. So at the end of this video, you can go back and watch those and get more detail on those very important steps, that very important information you need to know about how to build God's way. And now today we're going to look at 3 more steps as Nehemiah progressed through accomplishing this huge task, this huge assignment that God gave him. We're going to look at some more steps, some more things that he had to do to make sure that he was doing it God's way. And so we looked at prayer. We looked at taking our vision to the people that can help push us to the vision and not the people that want to hold us back. And number 3, we've got to make sure that we have the vision clear before we begin the work. So before we just jump in and start doing things, we've got to make sure that we've got the vision clear in our minds, clear in our eyes, clear in our thoughts before we begin the work. And why? There are two very key reasons why I'm going to tell you why you have to have a clear vision before you begin the work. First of all, Jesus tells us in Luke chapter 14, verses 28 and 29, it says, "For which of you, when he wants to build a watchtower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to finish? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you." So imagine this, and Jesus is very, very strategic. But imagine this: you're building a 50-foot tower in your field, and your neighbors can see this from far and wide. And you get to 40 feet, and all of a sudden you've run out of resources, you've run out of manpower, you've run out of the money that you need to complete the task. And now that 40-foot unfinished tower now has made you a mockery. It's made you the object of scorn of all your neighbors. As they walk by, they laugh at you. As you're walking through town, you can feel them laughing behind your back. You can see them kind of pointing at you and snickering as you walk through. And now here's the thing. It's one thing. I don't want that to happen just to me. I don't want to put myself in a position where I've started something and people are pointing at me and laughing. But here's the thing, and this is why it's so important to have the clear vision before you start building when it comes to the things of God. Because it's one thing for people to laugh at me, but if I'm out there, as I touched on before, if I'm out there telling people, God has directed me to do this, I'm doing this in God's power, I'm doing this by God's will, and now because I didn't do what Jesus instructed me to do, I've made it look like God has let me down. Now those that are wise and those that are sophisticated in the ways, they may know, okay, you know what? It could be that he didn't really do what God told him to do. But to those in the world, to those that don't know God, they take that as just a justification for what they already believe or don't believe. So when we're doing these things and we're out there professing that we're doing it for God, it's so important to follow these steps, to take in these ingredients, to make sure that we're not putting God's name in a bad way, in a bad image, in a bad light before the people who really don't quite know Him yet. And that's what goes on to say there. It also goes on to say, so number one, we want to make sure that we have a clear vision so that we don't start and not be able to complete the vision. But there's yet another reason, because no man is an island. No man is doing things on his own. And when we build and when we do things, there's a time when it's got to go public, and there's a time when we've got to bring other people in that are going to have to carry out the work. And that's why it says in the book of Habakkuk, it says, "Then the Lord replied, write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets so that others may run with it," so that a herald may run with it. So to go to others for help, we go to others for help. We get excited about this image that God gave us, this vision that God gave us, this plan that God has put on us, this great task for us to undertake. And we're so excited that God has chosen us to do it. But if we run to people before we have the vision set in our mind, now we're going and asking somebody for help. We're asking someone to contribute. We're asking someone to jump in. And yet we can't give a clear vision on what it is that we want to do, on what it is that we want to accomplish, or on how it is that we're going to accomplish it. Yeah, you know what? I'm going to go build a house on that lot over there. Yeah, come on, guys. Everybody gets all excited. Yeah, let's go build a house on that lot over there. Okay, so who's got the plans? Plans? What plans? You know, the architect plans. Where's the architect plans? We don't have any architects. Well, how about the construction people? Where are the construction people? I don't have any. Right? Who's going to follow a man like that who comes get him all excited about the task but has no vision, has no direction on how to actually achieve it? So we're going to look at Nehemiah here. And what does Nehemiah do? So Nehemiah has prayed, and he's gotten the okay from God to go ahead and do it. He's gotten the letters and the authority from the people who he needs the authority from to go and do it. So what's the first thing that Nehemiah does when he gets to the land, before he starts recruiting people to help, before he starts beginning the work? It says here in Nehemiah chapter 2, starting at verse 11, it says, "I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few others, not a whole group, not a whole crowd, didn't bring the whole city, with a few others. I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. So there were no mounts with me except the one I was riding on." And we see that he goes out during the night. So he goes out at night when there aren't going to be a lot of people out, where he's not going to run into people and have to explain what he's doing. But he does take a few people with him, his most trusted people, so that before he goes to enlist the help of others, he has a clear vision. He has seen the work that needs to be done. He knows what he needs as far as people, as far as materials to accomplish the task before he goes and do it. Now this is the thing. We notice he does take a few people along. It says he took a few people along. And there is a value in bringing a few people along if you choose the right people. Because here's the thing. If somebody comes to you with a grand vision, with something that looks too big to be accomplished, with something that's really monumental, with something that can really change the world, it can be very easy. If you go by yourself, if no one else has your vision, if no one else is there to back you up, it's very easy to dismiss one person as a kook, to dismiss one person as a dreamer, to dismiss one person as a quack. But yet when that same person comes and he's got some support from some people who have seen it, we see that now that person's not a quack, he's not a dreamer, he's a leader. He's a man that has a vision, and other people have already bought into that vision. And this reminds me of a video that I saw many years ago, and I believe it was called The First Follower. And what happens is the video is it's a big open field, like a music festival, and you can hear music playing, and everybody's just sitting on blankets watching the music. And all of a sudden, this one man gets up, and he just starts dancing all over the place. He doesn't care what anybody thinks. He doesn't care what anybody says. He's just having a good old time dancing. And then you see the people that are sitting around on the blankets, just too cool for school. Yeah, he's having fun, but man, we got to look cool first. And so you can see them, a lot of the people actually pointing at him, snickering at him, laughing about him, kind of whispering in each other's ears as they look at him, until all of a sudden a second person comes along. And this second person comes along, and they start dancing like that man was dancing, just carefree, not worrying about what anybody else thought. And then the next thing you know, a couple minutes after that second person jumps in, now a third person jumps in, then a fourth person jumps in, and by the time 4 people jump in, all of a sudden the same people who were snickering, the same people who were laughing are now jumping in. They're getting up off their blankets, they're joining in the dance, and they're joining in the fun. So it's important to have someone there to back you up, but it's got to see, why was it that second follower was so powerful in creating the movement? Because that second follower had that same spirit. That second follower had that same carefree spirit. That first follower had that same thought of, I'm going to have a good time and not worry about what anybody else thinks. So we've got to be very careful when we're starting the work, when we're gathering our vision, when we're forming our vision, to make sure that we have people with us who have the same spirit that we have, that have the same heart that we have. Because without that, they're not going to be that first follower that's needed to draw others, that makes you a leader. We need somebody that has that same vision, that same spirit. So be sure that those people that you bring in early as you're forming the vision, those few people, we think about Jesus, even on the Mount of Transfiguration. He didn't have all 12 disciples, and we know he had a lot more than just the 12 disciples with him, but he had the big group, and then he had the 12 and the 3, and he didn't take them all up on the mount when it was for the Transfiguration. He took along Peter, he took along James, he took along John, he took along those most trusted that he had, and so that when he came back down, they could help to communicate the vision and lead the vision. But again, he didn't take everybody along, because not everybody can be trusted with that vision when it first forms. And we're going to go through this here. It goes into a lot of description. I want to read this. It's not exciting, but it's important to read it to see that there's detail that goes into the planning and the forming of the vision. Because it says, by night I went out through the valley gate toward the Jackal Well and the Dung Gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates which had been destroyed by fire. Then I moved on toward the Fountain Gate and the King's Pool. But there was not enough room for my mount to get through, so I went up the valley by night examining the wall. So he gets off the mount and he presses on when he hits the obstacle. And then it says, finally I turned back and re-entered through the valley gate. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because as yet I had said nothing to them. So we see here that this is a step that many of us we kind of shortcut this because it's not an exciting thing. This is very often, sometimes it's a grind, sometimes it takes work. There's no glory, there's no glamour to it, there's nobody there shouting on saying, hey, great job researching that project, hey, great job forming a budget, way to go, buddy. Nobody's doing that thing, but it's so important that we do this work so that we can walk into a vision that's clear. We walk into with a map, with a direction, with a route that we need to take to get to the end. It's not glamorous, and we receive no recognition, but this is the thing. The other thing we see in here, and I love that they included in here, is that there comes a time when he's inspecting the wall, when he's forming the vision, and the mount that he's riding on can't go on. And this is a step sometimes when we're in this part of God's plan, where it can be very easy to bail out at this point. Sometimes we can just give up on the plan altogether because, oh, look at this obstacle, we can't overcome that. Or sometimes we can say, well, I'm still going to go ahead, but I'm not going to look into it, and I'm not going to research it, and I'm not going to finish completing the vision. I'm just going to wing it when I get to that part. When I get past this part, I'll just figure out how to do that when I get there. But we see he doesn't do that. He makes sure that he has a clear vision of the whole wall and what needs to be done. And if it means getting off his mount and walking and hiking up the mountain himself on foot, if it means wearing out the bottoms of his shoes, he's going to do it because he needs to make sure before he goes to the people that he has a clear vision. And so when he gets done inspecting the wall, then he goes to the group. Then he goes to the people that he's going to need to help him complete the task. And he said to them, you see the trouble we're in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me, and what the king had said to me. Again, we see it. Remember we talked about it when I was talking about what we talked about last week. Again, he's giving the glory to God, and this shows the mentality that has to run through this whole process in every step, that it's God's glory, that we're relying on God, letting people know that it's God that's bringing us through, not something that we're trying to take the glory for ourselves, but we've got to have that mentality even within ourselves. Sometimes we can even say to the glory of God, but in our minds we're thinking, look at what I did. So within ourselves and with what we share with other people, we've got to make sure that we're giving God the glory. And so the people that he's gone to, they replied, let us start rebuilding. So they began this good work. So the people bought in. And the people bought in because Nehemiah had inspected the work. Nehemiah had a clear vision himself. Nehemiah had people who backed up the vision that he had there with him, presenting to the people. So that's number 3. So we've got prayer. We've got starting off by taking it to people who have the authority and the desire to help us. And then number 3, creating and developing that clear vision ourselves. And number 4, be prepared for the fight. Just because God gave you the task doesn't mean there isn't going to be a fight. When he gave Moses the task of bringing the people out of Israel, but Moses had a fight. He had the Egyptians on his tail. As they were wandering in the desert, he had to fight. He had the people complaining about food in the desert. They had people complaining about water in the desert. They had to go to war with different nations as they were traveling. Even Moses had a fight. We look at even Elijah had a fight. That great prophet Elijah. He had to go to battle against the 400 prophets of Baal. He had to deal with Jezebel trying to kill him. He had to deal with droughts. He had to deal with all kinds of things. And of course Jesus, if there's anyone who went into the mission knowing there was going to be a fight, knowing that there was going to be persecution, knowing there were going to be people that were going to try and stop him, if Jesus had to go through it as Jesus was building our salvation, then what makes us think that as we try and lead others to salvation, as we try and do God's good work here, what makes us think that everybody is going to want us to succeed, that there's not going to be any fight? And we're going to see now how Nehemiah prepared for the fight in Nehemiah chapter 4. See, the fight doesn't begin with a physical threat or a physical attack. The fight actually begins mentally as their adversaries, Sanballat the Horite and Tobiah the Ammonite, are mocking them as they're building the wall. Sanballat is saying, look at that. What do they think they're doing? They think they're going to rebuild from those crumbled pieces of rock. They think they're going to rebuild in a day. What do they think they're doing? And then Tobiah the Amorite, he jumps in. He says, yeah, look at that wall. Look at that wall. A fox could jump on that wall. A little 15-pound fox could jump on that wall, and that wall would crumble. But I love Nehemiah's response. Nehemiah's immediate, not his last resort, but his first option is prayer. As they come up to him with these words, Nehemiah says, "Hear us, our God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in a land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders." I can't stress it enough. Prayer, continuous prayer, has got to be a part of anything that you are building for a God. Not just to ask at the beginning and to acknowledge at the end, but throughout and each step of the way, we've got to have prayer at the heart of it. But too often, what do? Too often we respond and embarrass ourselves. Too often we start a Twitter war when people start talking about us, when people start mocking us, when people start saying what they're going to say, or we get on Facebook and we start responding to the things that they say. And this is the thing, you're falling into exactly what they want you to do when you do that. Just pray, leave it in God's hands, and get back to work when the mocking starts, when the laughing starts, because you know that God's got you. You don't have to worry about what they think. And I think about, don't engage with the haters, just give it over to God, keep on praying, and get to the work that He's called you to do. And I remember a gentleman I knew a long time ago was building something in a ministry, and an ex that he had started posting stuff on Facebook, negative stuff about him, things he had done wrong, things, that he was a loser, he failed at everything when they were together. And he started responding on Facebook. Instead of giving it to God and letting God deal with it, he started coming back at her on Facebook. And what happened was, not only did things start to slip because he was no longer focused on the task, but now the people, listening to these venomous responses that he gave, the people that were helping him, the people that saw his vision, the people that were walking alongside him, started distancing themselves. They're seeing another side of him that they never should have seen, another side of him that never should have been presented publicly on Facebook. But give it to God in prayer and keep on moving. And so we see here that when words didn't work, so we know though sometimes when words don't work, when mocking doesn't work, when talking about us doesn't work, our enemies will often escalate things. They're not going to try and stop our work, and at the first time they fail, they're going to walk away. They're going to escalate things very often, and we see that happens here with Nehemiah as well. Because we see here in verse 11, Nehemiah tells us that his enemy said, "Our enemy said, before they know it or see us, we will be right there among them, and will kill them and put an end to the work." But in verse 13, Nehemiah says, "Therefore I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places, posting them by families with their swords, spears, and bows." So we see here that when the threat comes, when there is a threat present, the first thing that Nehemiah did is he identified the weak points. He identified the spots where they were susceptible to attack, and he placed people to watch over those places. So we see here the importance of watching as well as praying. That as we pray, we remain vigilant. In fact, as Jesus was praying in the Garden of Gethsemane before he was to be taken, we see that he keeps going back. He goes and he prays, and he comes back to the disciples, and he finds them sleeping. He goes away, and he's praying so fervently and so hard that he's got drops of blood coming out of him. And we see he goes back again, and what are they doing? They're sleeping again. And he says that keep actively watching and praying, that you may not come into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the body is weak. So we have to remain vigilant as we pray. We have to remain vigilant as we work. We can't be naive thinking that everybody around us wants us to see us succeed. Jesus even told us, if the world hates you, remember it hated me first. So when we're doing things for Jesus, when we're doing things for the kingdom, there are going to be those that want to stop us. So we have to pay attention to signs that danger is coming. We have to pay attention to signs that the enemy is lurking, and that some who want to stop what we have started don't have limits on what they will do when they respond. We have to be alert and on our guard that our body doesn't overtake our spirit, that we don't grow weary in doing good, that we are alert not just to physical danger, but we also need to be alert to the principalities, the powers, the rulers of darkness of this age, and against the spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places, that at all times we have on the full armor of God. So as we go out to do our work, as we go out to build, we've got to make sure that we have on the helmet of salvation. We've got to make sure that we have on the breastplate of righteousness. We make sure that we have the Bible of truth, the gospel around our waist, that we have the sandals of peace on our feet, that we have the shield of our faith to quench the fiery darts of the devil every single time we go out to work. And don't ever forget that sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. Because this is the thing. If you don't have the Word of God, if you don't have the sword of the Spirit, what happens now? Everything else is a defensive thing. It's a shield. It's to protect us. Now, this is the thing. If you've got no offensive weapon, the enemy can just attack relentlessly because they know that you can't do any harm to them. But when you have the Word of God, when you go about your work armed with the Word of God, they can't attack you at will because they know that you can cut off their head just as they're trying to cut off yours. And we look at, even if you doubt it, look at Jesus when he's tempted in the desert. After those 40 days of fasting and prayer, the devil comes at him, and not once does he call on deity. His response is always, "It is written. It is written. It is written." With the sword of the Spirit, he cut off the head of the devil and forced that devil to flee. So we go on in Nehemiah 4:14. It says, Nehemiah 4:14. So the people have heard that the enemy is trying. It says, we're just going to pop up and kill them when they're not looking. And Nehemiah says he saw the fear in their faces, and he stood and said to them, "Do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and with courage from him, fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, your homes, with the courage of God, knowing that he's on your side, that you need not have, when you've got that armor of God on, that he is going to take care of and fight right alongside you, and that he that is within us truly is greater than he that is in the world." And so in Nehemiah 4:15 now, the enemy has realized that they can't just walk up on these folks because they're alert, because they're aware, because they've got the weapons that they need to fight the battle. So now all of a sudden they retract a little bit, they withdraw a little bit, the enemy does. And it says, "Now when our enemies heard that we knew about their plot and that God had frustrated their plan, we all returned to the wall, each one to his work. From that day on, half of my servants carried on the work, while the other half held the spears, shields, bows, and breastplates." So this is the thing we've got to be aware of. When that enemy comes against us, and we have that initial victory against the enemy, when that snake that was slithering up on us has now retreated back into his hole, when he's retreated back into the tall grass where we can't see him anymore, that means that does not mean that enemy is gone forever. So even once the threat passes, we need to again remain that we watch as well as pray, that we remain vigilant, that again we continue to keep on the armor of God to protect ourselves, to defend ourselves against the tricks of the enemy. So if you want to know how do you prepare for the fight that's going to come anytime you're trying to build something for God, number one, you got to make sure you pray. Number two, make sure you watch. Number three, remember that God fights for you, that you don't have to go out there and risk it and do it yourself. God fights for you. Number four, stay about your work. Don't let it derail you. Be alert, but stay about your work. And number five, stay vigilant. Don't get to a point of comfort where you think, okay, that enemy's gone. That enemy can surface again anytime. So if you want to be prepared for the fight, continue to be prepared for the fight. So we've got the first four ingredients, the first four steps here in building the way that God would want us to. We're starting off with prayer. When we go to get started on the vision, we're taking it to people who have the desire and the ability to push us and get us to the vision. Number 3, we're making sure that we have the vision clear before we take it to the people so we can make it clear to them. Number 4, we are prepared for and willing to take on the fights that come our way with God as our shield and our strong tower. And the last thing I want to touch on, because we just finished talking about being prepared for the fight that comes from the enemy on the outside. But sometimes the fighting starts within our own walls. Sometimes it's not the person in the community. Sometimes it's not the person in the other ministry. Sometimes it's not the person in the other family. Sometimes it's somebody within our own family. Sometimes it's people within our own church is where the problems come from, is where the fights come from, is where the blockade comes from as we're trying to build. And very often this can be one of those things because sometimes when these things come up, sometimes we're so worried about offending the workers that as they start to squabble and fight, we don't say anything because we don't want to offend them and chase them off. Sometimes you think, okay, well, it's just a little thing, but we can deal with that a little bit later on down the line after we've gotten a little bit more work done. Sometimes we just pray and hope, Lord, just please, you figure it out, you make it work, and starting with prayer is a good thing, but there are times when we've got to be prepared to step in and address those things that are wrong with those that are doing the wrong without fear of how they're going to respond or fear about what they're going to do. You see it often in the church where you've got that person that's the big tither. Well, do we what? They've offended and they've hurt people, but do we want to say something to them because then we might lose their ties? That's the wrong mentality if you want to grow things the way that God would have you grow them. If you want to ensure the success of the building, we've got to make sure that we address when wrong is being done within our own walls. Even forget about outside the walls. When wrong is being done within our own walls, we have to address it in a strong manner. And we're going to look now at in Nehemiah chapter 5. It says that now the men and their wives raised a great outcry against their who? Not the Ammonites, not the Amorites, not the Hittites, not the Canaanites, against their own fellow Jews. So again, now the struggle is coming within the walls where we're trying to build. Some were saying, we and our sons and daughters are numerous. In order for us to eat and stay alive, we must get grain. Others were saying, we are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our homes to get grain during the famine. Still others were saying, we have had to borrow money to pay the king's tax. And those that have the money that borrowed, they're subjecting our sons and daughters to slavery. They're saying that some of our daughters have already been taken and enslaved. And here's now Nehemiah's response as he's hearing these things from the people. He says, when I heard their outcry and these charges, I was very angry. I pondered them in my mind, and then I accused the nobles of charging them interest. So I called together a large meeting to deal with them. See, this is where we go wrong sometimes. Because these are the nobles. These are the people with the power. These are the people with the money. And there may be a temptation. Well, we need them. We need their money. We need their power. We need their authority to get things done. So we turn a blind eye to that wrong that they're doing. But we see Nehemiah here. Nehemiah, he is strong and centered in what he does. And he says, this is wrong, and I'm going to address the wrong no matter the consequences, amen. I'm going to address what's wrong with the people that are doing wrong. He doesn't split the difference and say, well, yeah, but you over here, you did this, and you over here, you did that. No, you are the people that are doing wrong, and he addresses it with those that are doing wrong. He doesn't address it to everybody. He calls together those that are doing the wrong, and he addresses it with them. He says, so I continued, what you are doing is not right. Shouldn't you walk in fear of our God to avoid the reproach of our Gentile enemies? I and my brothers and my men are also lending people money and grain. So he's saying, even I'm lending people the money and grain, but I'm not doing it with interest. Give them back to them immediately their fields, vineyards, olive groves, and houses, and also the interest you are charging them, 1% of the money, grain, new wine, and olive oil. And they said, we will give it back, they said, and we will not demand anything more from them. We will do as you say. Because first of all, Nehemiah, what he does, he addresses it strong and direct. He addresses it to the people that are doing the wrong, and he reminds them that it's God that's delivering the message. Yeah, the words are coming out of my mouth, but it's God that's delivering this message. It's God that's letting you know that you are doing wrong. So there are so many things as God gives us things to do for His kingdom. There are so many, especially those big things, those things that He has placed on your heart that are so important to you. There are so many things to think about and go through as we go through it. But if you follow these steps, if you do these things, it will work out in your favor. And I'm going to recap them for you one more time, and then we're going to be done with this little series here. Number 1, pray. Number 2, pray. Number 3, pray. Number 4, pray. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Pray. Pray in all parts of it. So we list number 1, prayer, number 1. Number 2, take your vision to people who have the desire and the ability to help. Don't take your vision to dream killers. Don't take your vision to gossipers. Don't take your vision to them. Take your vision to the people that you know, and we all ought to know, if we're all hanging out with the right folks, if we're all hanging out with folks that share our spirit, we ought to be able to find some people that have the vision, that have the heart, that have the desire to help us, and also the power and authority to do so. Number 3, before you go and begin the work, make sure that you have the vision clear in your own mind. Number 1, to make sure that you're going to be able to complete the task that you start. And number 2, so that you can convey a clear vision and how it's going to come to pass to those people that you're going to need for help. Number 4, be prepared for a fight. It would be great if we could go through these things and never have a moment of stress or struggle, but the scriptures tell us different. The scriptures let us know that when we're doing things for God, there's going to be some opposition to it. There's going to be some pushback. There's going to be some enemies that don't want to see it happen. So be prepared for the fight. And number 5, even beyond the outward enemies that want to stop you, there are usually, when you're working in a group, there are going to be dynamics between the people. There are going to be people that want to do right and people that don't want to do right. Be strong in dealing with those that do not want to do right. Regardless of the money that they have, regardless of the image that they might portray, make sure that you're strong to make sure that the root doesn't wither, that the tree doesn't wither from within. Right? It's one thing to come along and chop down the tree, but what if you make the roots sick? You don't see the tree dying, but it's dying from the inside out. So make sure that as you're leading your team, that as you're leading the people that need to help you with this vision that God gave you, that you treat each one equitably, you treat each one fairly, and that you make sure that those who do wrong don't believe that they can continue to get away with wrong. So I thank everybody who's tuned in for this little series, this little Bible study here. Again, there will be in a moment or two, I'm going to pop up there a couple of links to the previous lessons that we did. But God bless you. God bless you. I pray that whatever the task is that God has given you, whatever the mission He's given you, whether it's starting your own ministry, whether it's just bringing your own family back together again, or whether it's just making yourself available as an ear for people who need an ear. It doesn't have to be rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. God has something for each and every one of us. And I pray that as you go forth and identify that thing God has called you to do, that as you walk along this path and follow these steps, that God's blessings be with you, that God's success be with you, and that the success doesn't change you. God bless you. God bless you. God bless you. Have a great day in the Lord. Remember that Jesus